All right, so we have an illustrious group back again tonight. Peter Hatges from KPMG, and Kenneth McClure, and Glenn Gary from Out West EV Club out in Vancouver, is it, Glenn?
Victoria
Victoria,
Electric Vehicle
excuse me, that's right.
Association.
Sorry, big sin. And this is great to have Peter back to actually follow up. We had so many questions come through on our first webinar that we didn't have time to address them all. And Peter's kindly offered to come back on and to speak with us and go through those questions with us. And Ken, with his silver tongue, will be the one reading the questions. And Ken, I'm going to just turn it over to you. I'm going to put Peter on spotlight, I think.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good.
You're on.
Okay. Well, thanks, Tim, for the intros, and welcome back, Peter. Good to have you again. Hopefully you can hear me okay as well.
Yeah, perfect.
Excellent. Well, so yeah, as Tim said, we had a really good feedback from the call. We had a lot of questions that we couldn't get to because of the time limits. So what we wanted to do is, as we promised the viewers, to follow up and get some additional questions answered. There were a lot of similar questions. We kind of combined some of those into different things. All right, so let me get to the first question. So there was a lot of comments regarding the hydrogen fuel cell, because I know you talked a bit about that, Peter, in your analysis, and questions about inability to charge at home, condominiums, homes. Some of that's similar with the condos, similar to EVs. Some of the costing regarding hydrogen fuel cell today, and range limitations. I mean, I think hydrogen fuel cells are great. I think there's a lot of development that's happening in that field. Certainly Toyota and other OEMs are continuing to consider hydrogen as part of their clean technology and their fleets. Of course, it does make sense for large commercial fleets, but where do you see that progressing, both commercially and from a consumer perspective?
Well, I think first of all, the listeners, have to appreciate that companies will pursue a tact based on their own customer base and based on their view of the future. I'm simply reporting what the activities are of both major OEMs and companies, across the globe and in the industry. So where do I see it going? I do think lithium-ion battery technology has the edge. I think it's become accepted. I think people have found applications for it. There are, there is an established platform. Obviously, Tesla's done a wonderful job, and the other OEMs are going to follow suit. But if you look at heavy trucks, Class 8 trucks, those trucks that you see that carry big things, and two of the big truck players in Europe, Volvo and Daimler, have formed a joint venture to work on hydrogen fuel cell technology. And, they're considering all kinds of factors and considerations: duration, length, suitability. There's a lot of technology that goes into it. We probably will never be able to cover it in a session like this, and there's a lot of science that goes into it.
Right.
But there are some attributes around hydrogen fuel cells that may seem to, at least right now, make it more applicable to, heavy trucks, Class 8 trucks, long haul trucks. And I think if you talk to the executives of the major OEMs, even Toyota, they would acknowledge that. So the way I see it is, I think, consistent with the way the industry is pursuing it. If you look at vehicles around town, the lithium-ion battery, is the way to go. There are charging limitations sometimes, for sure. And if you look at the development of certain cities, certain urban areas, Toronto's a good one. Condominiums today are very predominant in the development of housing and accommodation. And in Toronto, condominiums under 800 square feet in the GTA generally, now are not coming with parking spots. So, that makes it even more challenging should you have a car, never mind a car that needs electricity. Fuel is kind of portable, meaning that, you can go to the gas station, fuel it up, and away you go, and you can even put a gas tank in your car. You can't do that with electricity. So there are some limitations there. This will have to be overcome, obviously, and the evolution of time, we'll see. The whole issue really is the speed at which you refuel a car, whether the fuel's in the form of liquid fuel like gasoline or electricity. I think we said it on the last show, to fuel up a car today takes 7 minutes, 6 or 7 minutes, depending on whether you go in and, buy something else at the convenience store. And, the best electrification might take, I don't know, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 40 minutes, it depends. Depends how much of a charge you get. So, it's just different. And until that gap really narrows, we're going to have some concerns in the market. I do see significant emphasis on lithium ion technology. I think that's getting better and better. And I think it will continue to improve. I don't think the science is finished there yet. And I think that for some applications, hydrogen fuel cells may pose to be a better solution. The industry itself is going to solve that problem. We're not going to do it. They're going to do it.
Right. I mean, I think it's safe to say you'd probably agree that commercially it's a very viable way to look at green emissions moving forward because of the capex to, for an organization, a fleet to build a fueling station and then to regain, over time. It's got a very positive TCO, right? A lower TCO, so organizations can claim, and then all the savings, tax breaks, whatever incentives there might be for that. Consumer-wise, I mean, I know at the auto show where we originally met, I looked at the Toyota vehicle that was there, and I said, great, it looks great. The price isn't, I mean, it's as much as an EV, but where do you fill it? And there's like one station on the east side of Toronto or something. So it wouldn't make sense for me to drive 60 kilometers to fill it, and then another 60 just to get back home, right?
Right.
So certainly the infrastructure isn't there, as you alluded to, where EV infrastructure is much more relevant from a consumer perspective. But you're absolutely right. Organizations like Hyundai, with the Nexo, I mean, they are accelerating their engineering into hydrogen, mainly though for other areas like California and other countries that it's a bit more predominant. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I think, they're, depending on how you produce hydrogen, it can be, some of the biomass technology they use now, it's good, clean.
Yep.
The other thing that really hasn't been factored into the whole infrastructure equation, not really, is the cost of real estate in large urban centers, Vancouver, Toronto. It's extremely expensive. And, at first glance, electrification, a charging station does not require as much capital cost as, let's say, hydrogen fuel cell technology.
Right.
The hydrogen fuel cell. But, I think what overrides the whole economic equation is the cost of the real estate itself. It's very expensive. And somehow, some way, those costs will be recovered. And you do need charging stations, fueling stations at key points throughout the city. It doesn't matter. We can't put them all north of Vaughan. I mean, we have to have some in the city, and there's an expense and cost that goes with that.
Exactly.
And that economic rent will find its way. I assure you, it will find its way into the cost of refueling that car, electric or otherwise. So there's a balancing factor that overrides all of this, and I think location is important.
To speak into the economics of hydrogen and in cities, it's roughly about the amount of money that you spend for your average hydrogen fueling station, which is somewhere between $2.5 to $3 million. And that'll serve about 30 vehicles in one day, 5 kilograms each.
Right.
And there's also the fact you have to keep all the hydrogen chilled the entire time.
There's a temperature requirement, right?
Yep. Yeah. And that's taking more energy all the time.
Yep.
So from a public citizen taxation point of view, using incentives to put in something that costs you $3 million and can serve the needs of 30 people, when you can literally get a 10x sort of a benefit at level 3 DCFC for the same citizen taxes, that's an economic that's really.
No, it is for sure. Absolutely. Categorically. Yeah.
Good point. But I think lastly on this, you touched upon it, Peter, but there was a question about the wheel to well, or the life, the energy used for the production of hydrogen versus EVs. That there's still some debates about what's greener. I think it's safe to say that hydrogen is fairly beneficial when it comes to the amount of energy and carbon offset emissions in the production of that whole life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, you need components in a battery. You got to mine. There's rare earths that go into that, so there's an economic cost to that. I think these technologies, all of them, are still in the development stage, and I think the costs now and their production costs, not just dollars and cents, but the environmental implications will change
Mhm.
in the near term. I do think that very much,
Okay.
and hopefully for a better Earth and a better world, regardless of how we do it.
Yeah.
So I do think there are changes coming, and we'll see. From everything that I read and everything that I hear from the OEMs, they're still continue to be, and I think we've gone back to this before, very confident that lithium-ion battery technology will continue to evolve and get better, and that is going to, I think, set the tone for how we do it and where we go.
So one of the biggest, I guess, the most feedback that we got and some questions was regarding about the timing. So a lot of our viewers and a lot of people who follow the electrification movement think that
Yeah.
this progression is going to happen much faster.
Yeah.
When you look at, well, we double
I
every
got
year,
that
we
sense.
double
I
every
got
year,
that
right?
sense. Yeah, I get it all the time.
And I get it too, because we try to be a bit of a realist here, and sometimes news that is a
Yeah.
little less daunting, or more daunting, I guess, is not people want to see all the sunshine. But there was a question about Tony Seba. A lot of people are reading and following what Tony Seba talks about. He's a very smart guy. I
Yeah.
do like listening to him. I have some thoughts about his timeframes as well. I think they're a bit too aggressive. What's your take on Tony?
Well, I'd love to have a conversation with Tony.
Yeah.
I don't know how some of his predictions are going to come true, because it's such a big machine.
Yes.
The automotive production machine involves various continents, various countries, various supply chains, including critical supply chains from Asia. Notwithstanding, people think that might be a good idea for us to replace those supply chains. Good luck. You're not going to do that in the immediate term. And to change all of that on a dime and convert to a vehicle that's powered very differently from the way it is now, with a question around profitability, near-term profitability, it would be very difficult for me to see that you could get past, I think, what KPMG's prediction was, 12 to 13 million electrified vehicles by 2025, out of the big 12 manufacturers. And I think that even might be delayed. They would have to be producing those vehicles now. There would be a massive changeover of plant and equipment, and notwithstanding, and I think we touched on this the last episode, it is theoretically on paper a cheaper build, like an electric vehicle is cheaper,
Mhm.
it has fewer components. But there's a transitioning cost for all the vehicles that are in the fleet, or the car park, as it's referred to. For the readers that don't know what that is, that's all the registered vehicles in use today. And there's a lot of them in North America, hundreds of millions. 280 million, 320 million, depending on if you include Mexico. And you just cannot abandon that. That's impossible. That's not we can't just as an industry just turn the tap off at one well, turn it on the other, and just say, well, that's it. You need component parts. Oh, gee, we don't have them. That's not going to happen. So that's why the transition just can't happen as quickly as people might like. Now, what I will tell you is, if there's a breakthrough, you never know. If there's a breakthrough that I think can, increase range. Really, to me, range is becoming less important than it is fueling time, recharging time, fueling time. And if those things advance, then I think you'll see a faster move towards electrification. And then I do believe the buying public is ready for it, or looking for it. But like we said, the buying public in North America is very spoiled. I know I refer to it as the most prominent market. I think some of the listeners and readers took a little offense to that, thinking that maybe Asia is more important. We'll explain that in a minute. But we are used to a lot of choice. I mean, we pick 10 different colors for a car, and the interiors, and various choices, and SUVs, which become far more popular, and trucks far more popular than passenger vehicles with 4 doors. And without that choice, and without that availability, and without that ability to compare, I don't think buyers are motivated not as many buyers are motivated to acquire that kind of vehicle because it is expensive and you want what you want. So the industry has to progress to the point where it has enough product proliferation, because that's the basis on which it has sold cars for years and years and decades. Uh, it's a little narrower now, and rightly so. GM used to use brand proliferation to its detriment, but it doesn't anymore, and it does a very good job of it. You need it, and until all of that comes together, you won't be able to sell the electrified vehicles in the volumes that you would like to see or expect. But it's coming.
Peter, just want to
Go ahead.
jump in if I might,
Sure.
because I'm an electric car guy. I've been driving one for 7 years. Actually, I've had two over that period of time.
Yeah.
And to your comment about the charging speed, I think that goes more to education than to reality. Charging speed has not been an issue for me, and I drive a lot. Like I drive more than average, let's put it that way,
Yeah.
probably about 35,000 kilometers a year. And truly, over that 7-year period, charging has not been a major inconvenience.
Yeah, I probably run out of gas more than you have.
Well, if you're the type,
It's just terrible.
if you're the type of person who runs out of gas, then yeah, you might run out of electricity.
Yeah.
But that's the only reason that should happen.
Well, I'm assuming you charge. You have the ability to charge overnight, and when you're not using your car, you have the ability to charge it, and it's charged sufficiently so you can do your daily tasks, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. I think. Look, I agree with you. I don't think. For a big portion of the population, it's a big issue. For some people that travel a heck of a lot in unpredictable ways, sure, okay, we know what the problem is there.
Mhm.
But I agree. I mean, I think if you can charge it at home, charge it at your cottage, charge it wherever you need to charge it, you can travel 200, 300, 400 kilometers, 500 kilometers, not have to worry.
Well, you can drive to Florida from Toronto, and if you time it so that if you're not a road warrior, as you're saying,
Yeah.
and you want to stop and take a bio break, have lunch or have dinner, you can time the charging. And if it's 30 minutes to charge, you usually can't finish lunch or dinner in that period. So you got a full. It's how you have to manage it a little bit differently. I totally agree.
You do.
Two things.
But I agree. That's true. I think time management, what North Americans are unaccustomed to is they have this huge luxury of being non-attentive when they're going somewhere.
Yeah.
Because there's a gas station everywhere, right? Like, there's only a quarter tank of gas. Oh, gee, never thought of that. Okay. Whereas, maybe you should have thought of that, and if you'd had an electric vehicle, you just remember to charge it before you had to go to the cottage or to a wedding or to whatever you're going to do the next day. But all it does is take some thought and planning. You're right. It is a manageable. Electric charge vehicles are now manageable in many ways to travel the distances that you need.
Yeah,
I have a fast question for you, Peter.
Yep.
Do you own an electric car?
No.
Does anybody in your research team own an electric car?
Well, first of all, now I'm going to say this, but a lot of our young students and in our research group and in our bullpen, as we refer to it, a lot of them are still in public transit. They work downtown, so it is partially a function of where we work and where we reside. They're downtown dwellers that rely very much on public transit. So I would say that that's a far bigger factor than their choice between an internal combustion engine or an electric vehicle. They just don't own vehicles right now at their stage in their career. Having said that, I think we're finally seeing it for the first time. A lot of my colleagues are now starting to consider that their next purchase will be an electric vehicle and or hybrid, and that's the first time I've heard of that kind of discussion. It's becoming more common.
Certainly taking some steps forward, and I think part of to close up on the Tony Seba, part of the reasoning, as you alluded to in your comments, additionally is, we haven't hit cost parity, so choice is one thing. I think we can safely say the charging infrastructure in most major urban areas and most of the modernized world is much better than it was 10 years ago.
Oh yeah.
It continues to get better, so that is progressing. There is some thought about owning an EV. You have to plan a little bit more if you're taking long trips, but for day-to-day use, you just get in and go. And if you can charge at home, it's great. But certainly cost parity. And you talked about that the OEMs haven't really hit those economies of scale yet to be able to bring that pricing down so that
Right.
if I were to look at a loaded Honda Civic or a Nissan Leaf, which are comparably about the same vehicles, but one is, $15,000, $20,000 more.
Yeah.
We understand the benefits, but the upfront purchase price is a hard pill to swallow. Do you see that happening this decade? Cost parity.
Yeah, I do. I think what you're going to see. So I think that and getting back to it, just to finish off the point on chargeability, you're right. The biggest impediment there is, some people just don't have the ability sometimes to charge overnight because they don't have accessibility to a charger. They live in an apartment or something, or whatever the restrictions are. But I think you're right. I think the charging infrastructure sort of has come a long way, and is really
And
good.
there are millions of people who live in homes. So even if we just take away apartments and condos, just
Yeah.
look at detached dwellings or
Yeah,
town.
if you can do
Those
it in your
people.
home, you're in good shape.
So
So
there's a
getting
lot.
back to the cost equation. I mean, you need. We all know how production runs and production cars are manufactured. First of all, there's a lot of R&D that needs to be recovered from producing a new vehicle, despite what the population might think, that these guys just put it up on a drawing board and whip it all together and then go to the factory and just assemble it. It's a little more challenging than that. There's a lot of components that go into it, and you have to recover those costs.
Mhm.
And so its volume is important, not just for the sheer productivity of it, but the cost of designing and developing that car and advertising that car, has to be recovered too. So um, you look at Ford and some of its most productive models and profitable models. The F-150 sells 950,000 units in North America. It's really good. You need those kind of volumes. You need
Right.
big volumes. You need we sell 2 million vehicles in Canada. Let's face it, a quarter of them need to start to become electric, where then the OEMs can say, all right, look, even if we're making a little bit of profit, we'll bite the bullet, balance the books. We'll still make some profit on our large combustion engine driven vehicles and trucks while we get this product refined and up to the volumes that we need it to be. Volume is key in the industry. The industry works on a couple different factors. One of them is volume. Second part is uninterrupted volume. Third part is reliability and no major recall. So that can be extremely costly if you've designed something seriously wrong. These things generally don't take place anymore, but sometimes.
And I would put that out there that the likelihood of recalls are less on EVs than they would be on
Less components,
just because of the sheer components and the whole
Yeah.
infrastructure there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good thing. So those are the things that need to happen. I think it will. I think this decade. So we're in 2020 before the end of 2030. I do believe we're going to have economies of scale. I do. I'd like to believe it's 5 years from now where the economies of scale will really start. We'll see production of vehicles. I know. We know what's on the drawing board with the major OEMs. They have these things on the drawing board. The failure will be if, notwithstanding the wisdom of the number of us on this little podcast here, if the consumer doesn't see it the way we do, and they don't purchase the vehicles in the shape and form that we expect them to.
Do you expect OEMs to start educating consumers on EVs more? Do you think? Because education we find is part of the issue, right?
And advertising,
people, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be a huge. I think there needs to be a huge advertising campaign, and you're going to probably see some extremely innovative things coming out of California and New York.
Okay.
On comparing internal combustion engines and electric vehicles, and I can just imagine them now. But there does need to be an education, and people need to understand that there's a lot of attributes to an electric vehicle. One of the biggest things is, if you've ever been in one, for those who haven't, there's a lot of room inside one. There's no tunnel for the transmission, right? It's a little roomier. It's different. It's nice. It's quiet too. It's cool.
And powerful.
Here's something else that kicks in about the experience is anybody who actually spends enough time in one, buys one, and never looks at another internal combustion engine again. Family generally doesn't, if they can afford to, ever look at an internal combustion engine again. So that market share is being eaten away every year. Demand in BC.
Well, you just have to, I think you made a great point. I think you just have to follow Porsche. And, it has a lot of aficionados who, enjoy speed and acceleration to 60 as quickly as they can. And, to do it in a combustion engine, you have to chase so many horsepower. And there's diminishing returns after 350 or 400 horsepower in a car. It just doesn't do as much. Whereas an electric car, the analogy is the light switch. You turn it on, you turn it on.
Mhm.
Press on the gas, you press on the gas, so to speak. Press on the
Accelerator, yeah.
The experience there, I think, can be wonderful. And I think for people who really enjoy driving, it's going to be outstanding if they can, if people, and I do believe this, I think manufacturers like Porsche will change a whole generation of thinking on it when they can produce cars that are exciting and at the same time, environmentally friendly. I think it's going to be a huge step forward.
You
I
mentioned.
want to know if Tim's
go
going to
ahead.
take you out for a charge in his Tesla and let you play and then re-examine that word, exciting.
Yeah, well, I have had a Tesla on a racetrack, believe it or not, of Sudan,
Nice.
and it's it handles pretty well, but it's not a Porsche GT3, but it certainly accelerates. I know that feeling, and
Yeah, it's
for,
not tuned
for
to be one
listeners out
either.
there, it's fantastic. Let me tell you.
For sure.
But what you really need is to live with it for a few weeks, not
Mhm.
a day on the track. That's where you really find out how much more convenient it is than a gas car.
Yeah.
It just in refueling and in many other ways, it's
Yeah.
a much more pleasurable experience.
Well, there's something nice about like refueling at your house, like I don't have to go to the gas station. That's a neat thing.
Huge.
Not
It's
sucking in benzene.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
3
lining
days
up.
a week. Yeah, no. You
Or,
mentioned
when you got a gallon of gas left in your car and you realize your credit card's not working,
Yeah.
then you got a real big problem.
You mentioned California. There was some comments and questions regarding some of the points you talked about the U.S. being a trendsetter, and
Yeah.
I wanted to know if you could explain that a little bit more because a lot of the audience didn't kind of pick up on that.
Yeah.
How
So
important that marketplace is.
listen, I feel very strongly about this. The United States, the U.S. market, and the consumers in the U.S. market enjoy one of the richest levels of choice, production, advancements. Anything that's new generally makes it there. It's a very rich consumer environment. They have a lot of purchasers, and China, and I think we should recognize that Asia, China does have a lot more focus on electrification. They're probably more advanced. But if you see the cars that are being used there, is nothing wrong with them. They're electrified cars. They're more utilitarian. I don't think
right,
I don't think they'd sell in North America. I don't think you could take that product lineup and move it to North America and say, yeah, I'm going to make this is my bet.
Some have tried Skoda and some others in the past.
Yeah,
right?
I mean it's a different market,
Yeah,
and it's
it is.
people enjoy the beauty of cars. I think the '60s era still draws some record numbers at the Barrett-Jackson auctions because the design of vehicles in the United States really followed an evolution. I think they're still following an evolution today, and so it's a market that's diverse. It's a market that has all kinds of vehicles in it. It's a market that covers a lot of ground, a lot of physical distancing, a lot of different uses. Like I said, trucks, cars, passenger cars, sports cars. And so, you have to appeal to a wider audience that has a lot of money and a lot of choice. So it has a bigger determining characteristic than what I would call more unified market as China is in its development stage today. But 15 years from now, it'll probably be very, very different.
But
and the North American market is a bigger market. It still has more registered vehicles right now. North America, meaning Canada and Mexico, than China, I believe. But that's changing fast, as we all know. We could look at those statistics in 3 years and changing.
Go ahead, Glenn.
If you look at the percentage of global cars made, about 20% are North America writ large. The 17 million that are made Mexico, Canada, US.
Yeah.
The rest of the market is not here.
No.
And by default, I mean, we saw this, I'm a motorcyclist, sport motorcyclist. There has not been a motorcycle made for the North American market, except one made in North America for the North American market for over a decade. We are not where the production houses and the design houses are thinking about at all. Even Magna, you know, a huge tier 1 supplier.
Yeah.
I think they've said we're getting out of internal combustion design.
Yeah, and they have their assembly facility in Austria where they're assembling cars and making cars and doing all those kinds of things. I think you're right. I think production, the German automobiles, you know, in the luxury market do well in North America, but there's still a small fraction of it. The North American market is what it is. It's a unique market. I guess when I look at it, I look at it from a North American perspective and how different it is. And, you know, to be successful here, you have to cater to it just like you have to cater to every other market. And the European market has always been different, not just because the cars drive on a different side of the road, but fuel's more costly, et cetera, et cetera. I read something on the cost of fuel the other day in the United States. I think it was $2.10 a gallon.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that's cheap.
That is cheap.
Yeah.
But how do you see things like legislation impacting in the 5, 10, 15-year outlook for?
Yeah, here's the wild card, huh? The legislation, what governments are going to do. They're facing a lot of pressures right now. You know, I don't know if I've ever been in a period in my life where I've seen so many different conflicts and competing interests that governments and legislators need to deal with around the world. You know, the environment's still very important, and it is funny. I'm surprised that the last 2 weeks. I'm sure it's purely coincidence, but since we've had this slowdown and sort of suspension of economic activity, I've never seen a succession of sunnier days with blue skies that I've seen the longest time. Who knows? Maybe it's a coincidence, but boy, if that's the byproduct of good legislation, let's have it. And, you know, let's move as quick as we can. I think governments are on it. There's no question in my mind that they will influence the OEMs. The OEMs have been through this before. They've been through it with the fuel crisis, and they know what it means to fall behind, because then you make vehicles that people don't like and you open yourself up to competition, just like they did to the Japanese, the North Americans in the 70s when fuel prices were out of control and they made very inefficient big block, small block V8s. So I don't think they're going to make those mistakes anymore. I don't think any of the OEMs are going to make those mistakes. I think they do want to be leading edge. They want to follow what they expect will be a societal norm that wants to restrict greenhouse emission gases. I do think that's going to be a societal norm.
Yeah, the history of the automobile and the whole industry has been that the auto industry has never led in fuel efficiency. Like, they've always been ordered.
Mandated. Yeah.
They've never led in passenger safety. It's always been mandated. They've always had a gun to their head. They always lead in protecting profit. And they're a company, and that's their job.
Sure.
That is job one, protect profit.
Sure.
But to say,
look, I mean, I think Honda made its living on trying to be fuel efficient and trying to lead in those kinds of things. Obviously, competitors take advantage of gaps they see in the market. I think you're generally right, though. I mean, Volvo would say that they were leaders in safety, 15 years ago, whatever the case may be. But you're right. I think the industry itself does recognize profitability, but one thing they recognize is that if you contravene legislation today, and what is, in my opinion, a very heightened level of awareness amongst consumers and people, and legislation tends to take on a life of its own. I do think that they will be mindful and respond to what they see in the future. My hope is that the technology continues to advance, and the exciting things that come with electrified vehicles, like acceleration and sometimes the unexpected convenience of powering at home and recharging at home, and the quiet drive and all of those great things, people start to recognize those things and push the industry to just make the vehicles people want to buy.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tim. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to, this is my own question, and you're so perfectly suited to be able to give perspective to it.
Uh-huh.
No, really. And so, because you've really captured and made it clear to me how huge and how important and that the auto industry is,
Yeah.
and what a big machine that is at driving the economy and everything else. Where does disruption come in to this? Could something disrupt the traditional OEMs and come from go around them on this and make things happen faster?
Well, I know there's a lot of talk about that, and people may enjoy believing that. There's been a lot of transactions and rumored transactions by companies like Google and others. I can tell you, you just have to ask Tesla how difficult it is to make cars and how much money they've had to put into reaching a level of profitability. And all the work that goes into it. I don't think it's that easy. I still think the effective design of a vehicle, the manufacturing process itself, the combination of things, satisfying consumers, I think that's still that expertise still resides in the hands of the OEMs. And I don't think that's going away. So I don't see disruption there. What I see, the disruption that I see, and I do see disruption. So let's be clear about this. The disruption that I see is to manufacturers of components that will be rendered obsolete. So a transmission in an internal combustion engine, you have to look at yourself 10 years from now and say, wonder what the application of that is, and how is that component, how is that assembly, how is that piece of machinery going to adapt to an electric vehicle that doesn't use a transmission right now? It might in the future. And I hear that they're working on it, and interesting to see what it does or what the attributes are. No one's ever been able to put a transmission in a boat, so we'll see. That's what I see. I see disruption there, and I think if you're a parts manufacturer and you're looking at the implication of what you're doing and how you're satisfying your customer, hopefully you understand your relevancy in the next 10 years. Because if you don't, you better find something different to do or expand what you're doing. It's not going to work.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, good question, Tim. And I was actually going to mention Tesla. So I totally agree. I mean, you could certainly say Tesla has been a bit of a disruptor in the EV market. And they are a leader, but they should be a leader because that's all they do, right? They've been able to take 10 years of honing, or more than that, 12 years, I guess, of honing their skills at building EVs, because that's all they do as an organization to get it right and to get the best product out there.
Without really making a profit.
Yeah,
the
I know.
shareholders have been very tolerant. They won't necessarily be tolerant of BMW if they go on a 10-year trek and go, hey, we're going to discover ourselves.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Tesla's only, you're right. It's taken them 8, 9, 10 years to finally get into a profit rhythm. I think they've seen now 2 or 3 successive quarters of profitability. Even if it's minute, it's still profitability. So that there's certainly things are turning. The Model 3, I think, was really their model to kind of put them over into that profitability edge once they were able to build it up and get sufficient masses out there. So they've obviously had a big impact on the marketplace to show OEMs that battery electric vehicles can be acceptable commercially. Do you see anything? What would you say? And not to put your Tesla crystal ball out there and see what's going on, but do you see how other innovations or how innovative Tesla could become in the future and impact the market?
Well, look, I think now it's fair to say that they have emphasized electrification the most. They probably have the most advanced battery technology. They seem to have attributes in their cars that are right now a little bit better than maybe the
definitely the best. Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
They're the best, and I think people would acknowledge that in general. And it will be interesting to see how Tesla fares. When you think of Tesla, it has it has the Model 3, it has the sedan, it has its SUV. It has 3 or 4 models. It's working on its truck. Not bad compared to a modern OEM. I mean, I don't know how many digits BMW has now between X's and M's, and all of them, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of
3,
different
4,
models, right?
5, 6, 7.
You know, there's a lot of variation, a lot
Yeah.
of differentiation that a consumer can find his uniqueness, because I believe one of the attributes of vehicles for the consumer, and I don't think this is going away. I don't, because it's a big purchase and it's a notable purchase because you drive it, people see you in it. It's an extension of your personality.
Mhm.
Some people will buy a, you know, highly powered Tesla sedan because they really like it. Some will buy a utility vehicle like an SUV because they really need it.
Mhm.
Some people will need a truck because that's what they use for work.
Mhm.
And so, you know, it'll be very, very different. And
Mhm.
I think where Tesla may run a little bit into trouble is when the large or more competition, let's not say trouble, but
Right.
you know, when the big OEMs start to make electric vehicles with a wide variety of choice and a track record of building reliable product, right? But you know, the doors, the hinges, the windows, the windshields, the windshield wipers, all of those things, you know, they've built for decades now, and by now they've figured those out. So hopefully they'll work and they'll give consumers what they expect.
But Peter, the way the industry works now is GM doesn't make any of that stuff.
No.
They're completely horizontally integrated, and
Yeah,
they're paying a profit to
that's
each
true.
and every Tom, Dick, and Harry.
That's true.
And
But they do specify design and they do make some components, but most of their emphasis is on engines and some of the big interior components or some of the electronics. But you're right, those are subcontracted to a huge group of tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. But you know, you still have to put it on the car and get it on the car. It's one thing to design it, specify it. It's another thing to get it into the factory, put it on there and make sure it goes back and forth properly. I'm sure it can be done, and I'm sure it's, you know, Tesla's proven that it can do it. So it's still a big chore, I think, for someone to go from a clean sheet of paper to building vehicles when they've never done it before, because there is a big supply chain organization and management of a factory and the advertising that goes with it.
No doubt that, you know, Tesla's going to continue to prosper. They might have, you know, ups and downs, of course, like all companies, but they will
Yeah, I think
continue
so.
to grow and develop new product and do well and continue to innovate in that marketplace. But I do agree with you, and I've been talking about this to a lot of folks, that, you know, the OEMs with partnerships and with collaborations, you know, we got VW and Ford now collaborating with the MEB platform on certain models and segments and worldwide markets. We're going to see a lot more synergies. And I think, you know, these are companies that have, you know, VW Group has what, 600,000 workforce, 130 plants around the world. I mean, with a global presence in many different markets. So,
Yeah.
you know, if people like that, you know, they get on board and start chugging. But as you're saying, it's taking time. But, you know, you talked about all the monies that are spent, and we're seeing that. And there was a question asked about China, and we're coming near the end of this. That, you know, China has seemed to turn around pretty quickly of endorsing EVs and getting them up to speed. So, you know, people are saying, well, why can't North America, why can't Europe do that if China? Is that just strictly because of it's a dictatorship government that just kind of pushes it, or is it more to it?
I don't buy that. I think, you know, they've got a younger industry. We have legacy costs, big infrastructure, established plants,
Yeah.
hard to turn around, pension funds to fund. You know,
Now it's coming out.
it's not.
Labor
things that have to fail.
You know,
True.
profit is big. It's a big
Yeah.
concern because
Yeah.
you've got a lot of expenses coming out the other end. So, and I think, you know, a mature industry isn't always as nimble and as quick as a younger one and a new one. And you know, they're unshackled. They got free thinking. You know what? They can do what they want. And I do think their society is a little more direct in what they do, but I think
Sure.
they're freer thinking for that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Glenn.
There's a phrase, one of the sources, because I mean, if you continue to only read the mail that makes yourself happy, you're going to be happy and poorly informed. So
Yeah.
I tend to dig into the auto industry itself a lot. And have you heard this phrase? Profit desert. A profit desert of about 5 years long. And that is what the big OEMs are looking at. And all the board members are probably looking at, I'm up in 2 years. Can I push it off? Can I push it off?
Yeah, they call it the other word for it is a desert walk.
Desert Walk.
But yes, I think that's right. I think this is a transition period. And the profitability that's being generated now, and I think we talked about this in our last session. The big OEMs were amassing capital because they foresaw and can foresee capital expenditures change, new platform. And they need money to do that. And if you look at how much money has been borrowed in the last, after this pandemic, I think the industry as a whole has borrowed something like $500 million, just to get through not just this period, but for whatever their capital expenditure needs are. So, it's making a bet on the future, and that future has to be successful because they do have to pay these people back. Usually that's the way it works.
That's,
so.
Yeah, good segue to the last point that was offered, about the prediction for this year, about some of the analysis that you provided. We're into a new month. We've got some, data back from April about what we're seeing from plug-in sales. So my last question to you in a couple-minute answer is, do you see any prediction changes to how this year may fare out, both Canada and maybe globally, if you can wear two hats on that from an EV perspective?
Well, I think just let's take the total population of vehicles. So, our best year was 2 million units. Small portion of that was electric. Last year was about 1.9 million vehicles. This
I would
year,
be down this year, right?
Yeah, this year we got to be down, 2 out of 12, maybe 3 out of 12 months. 2 out of 12, pretty low months. So, 20% or so reduction and a corresponding reduction to electric. What I'm not sure of, and I think this is what the industry's counting on, hoping for, including the Republican government in the United States, that consumers have been sitting here, reconfiguring cars all day and got the itch to, go out and purchase those cars. And the big question is, are the lost vehicle sales or the downtrend in vehicle sales for the 2 months lost or postponed in the year? So my prediction is they're lost. They're not going to be there. You won't see a recovery. So we will, I think we'd be good in Canada to see, 1.6, 1.5 million vehicles sold, and, see what happens in the United States, maybe 14 million vehicles or so. I don't know. And I think if they can do better, if the OEMs can do better, that's great. But, they've had some production downturn too. They stopped producing the vehicles. So, they're not going to double up and go even faster. So I don't see the math working. If someone could explain it to me, but you'd have to have the factories working overtime in a period where that's probably discouraged, right?
Yep.
And
I
just don't know. I just don't know how they can make it up. So I see a permanent decline lost this year, and I'm predicting a recovery next year.
I would agree with you, and certainly where we may see an increase is the ratio of EV versus ICE or non-EV sales in Canada. That ratio grow because EVs may hold fairly steady, or they may not lose as big a percentage as ICE. So in relative aspects, they may increase relative to internal combustions. But again, I still think all car sales will be down as you do, even EVs, but the ratio may be a bit higher by comparison.
Yeah. I think this year is not going to be meaningful. So the ramp up in EV sales for the KPMG prediction to at least be reasonably accurate has to start. The ramp up has to start next year, and consecutively each year after that. So if we're going to have 25% of our fleet sold fleet being electrified, that ramp up has to start, because you want consumers to be accepting it. You want to see them on the road. And I think the other thing is, when people see more of them, more electric vehicles, I think it inspires more confidence. I think people say, hey, You know what? Hey, that guy's got one. Look at Tim Burrows. He's driving around his electric car all the time. Look at this.
Yeah. Yeah. He
You know?
shows it off all the time for
Yeah,
sure.
he shows it off. Look, he tears down the street so fast. Holy mackerel.
They
No,
don't know who I don't know who I am. So
Yeah.
actually, I think Kenneth, we've gone through the Q&A. I think
Yeah,
we've-
that's it. That was the last question. I'll
Peter,
turn it
that
back
was
over
just
to you. Yeah.
Yeah, that was just amazing. I think that's really going to fit nicely, tucked in next to the full webinar episode.
Good.
So folks
Yeah.
can go, we'll find it there.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm going to thank you, Peter, and Glenn, and Kenneth, of course. I
Yeah.
think that was really worthwhile, and I appreciate your time. I'm going to call it an end there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And, you know, we should do this again. We should catch up next year to see, well, all these things that we talked about, what actually really happened.
Oh, that's a great
For the
idea.
viewers, it'd be interesting for the viewers to see, well, what did really happen.
We're going to hold you to that.
Okay.
Hopefully we can do it live as a panel.
Yeah.